Hi, welcome back to another sketchbook video, and not just any sketchbook video, but a good old portrait practice session. Improving my portrait drawings is a goal I set for this summer, so while this video stands on its own, keep an eye out for follow-up practice sessions as I'll try out different techniques, materials, and hopefully more complex expressions and angles. The method I'm using today is the Loomis method for drawing heads, which I'm sure we've all at least heard about at some point. I'm using 3 colored pencils for these practice sketches: a light beige shade, a dark gray, and a pure black. The light shade is for the geometric shapes that form the Loomis method heads, over which I can draw with the gray. The base of a Loomis head is always a sphere, so you'll see me draw wonky circles on this sketchbook page a lot. Then there's the center line of the face, the nose line or midline, which forms a cross with the horizontal line marking the eyebrows and showing the halfway point of the sphere. The sides of the sphere need to be shaved off, or else the heads would turn out too round. I think this is one step that I'd forgotten about since I first read about this method years ago, so my heads always look too wide and unnaturally round if I construct them from imagination. You can see that leaves an ellipsis shape behind if we look at a head from an angle, but this would be a perfectly round circle shape if we were drawing a profile view. The bottom of that ellipsis is where the jawbone attaches and can also be used as a starting point for the bottom of the ear and nose, while the top of the ellipsis can be used to find the hairline. With the brow line and the bottom of the nose distance established, it's time to add the third part, the bottom of the chin. From hairline to brow line to nose line to chin line, these are all equidistant. I think these 3 areas are probably familiar to a lot of artists, no matter what technique you use, but it felt helpful to see it here again. The mouth is another important part, placed about a third of the way down from the nose line. I used this simple sketch here to familiarize myself with the basic setup. There's a lot more to Loomis's method and advice for drawing heads, but I wanted to practice these basics before moving further. To practice, I'm using reference images of characters from the House of the Dragon, a mix of screenshots and promotional material, just so it would be more interesting than random heads I had no connection to. I also find that I can see mistakes better when I'm familiar with a face, be it an actor or actress or a friend. Using the lighter shade, I completely ignored the actual expression or lighting and just focused on the elements important to the geometric shapes of the Loomis method. What angle is the center line of the face at? How high up is the brow line? And with those 2 established, how do they relate to the nose, the jaw, and the mouth line? This approach meant that this portrait isn't a very good likeness of Alicent, since I ignored some parts that make her face unique in favor of this constructed simplicity. But it also meant that this face was incredibly quick to sketch, and it felt very easy to draw an expression that, while not precisely her, looked convincing by itself. So while I'm using these references here for the sake of practice, if your goal is an exact likeness of a person, keep in mind that us humans all come with different bone structures, unique nose lengths, eye positions, high or low set brows, different jawlines, and the most basic version of the Loomis method doesn't quite account for those, though he does go into more detail in his book. A dark shade over a very light one is one of my favorite sketching techniques, since it means I can ignore the eraser and just redraw mistakes by going darker. The black shade is an extension of that. If I mess up with the gray, I can add some more contrast and slightly shift an expression by going in with that even more intense shade. I ended up not needing the black much, so just 2 colors should be enough for your own sketching session. I'm using the Derwent Lightfast pencils, a new addition to my collection. They are more intense and chunky than Prismacolors, so they pack a punch, but not as intense and soft as the Caran d'Ache Luminance. For those, I'd like a larger sketchbook format. This sketchbook is only an A5 size, so fitting multiple heads on each page can be a bit limiting. I think I studied this drawing technique many years ago, but adapted for manga character art, so today I'll have to refresh my memory. If you're new to Loomis heads, I hope this is a helpful, simplified introduction for you too. In my own drawings, the eyes often move too high up, as if they were the brow line, and I have a tendency to make the noses too long as well. Going back over basics can show some simple solutions and tricks we forgot about. The standard proportions I just learned didn't quite fit, so once I'd drawn my light beige guidelines and started using the grey pencil to draw the actual features, I adjusted some elements. The method was still very helpful since it made finding some of those key elements that are so difficult in side profiles, like the position of the ear or beginning of the jawbone, so much easier. Especially for Bela here, I found the guidelines less helpful, not quite leaving room to maneuver her facial proportions. With this drawing advice developed in the 1940s, there's no real accounting for diversity except age, so I wasn't surprised that Bela's portrait was the one where I struggled the most. This is where I loved having the two colored pencils, one for the guidelines and the other to then not only follow the guidelines, but see where they wouldn't fit and deciding to ignore or adjust them where necessary. The same happens later for her in-show grandmother Renice, where I also struggled to make the guidelines work with her actual facial proportions. Loomis does show variations in his drawing guides, so while it's important to get a very basic idea of a very simplified head and facial proportions, don't be scared to then break those rules. They were never intended as rules, but as helpful guidelines. I think knowing about them, having them at the back of my mind, will help me see those facial variations more easily, because I'll have a frame of reference for them. In the end, all these sketches went by incredibly fast, and the most helpful part of the Loomis method for me was this sense of space it creates. Especially when it comes to the head beyond the most attention-grabbing features like eyes and nose. I often struggle with the back of the head or the placement of ears, and this method helped so much with getting those down in just a few simple lines and circles. Even if you ignore all the facial proportions, having the basic sphere with its crossing lines and the sliced off sides can be incredibly helpful. I'll definitely be drawing more of these now that I remember the overall setup of a Loomis head. Let me know if there are any characters in particular you think would be an interesting challenge. With some practice, this hopefully really helps me to draw more portraits purely from imagination, without them turning out generic, and I'm very excited to try out some other famous portrait drawing methods in future videos as well. Let me know if you ever learned about Loomis's method or similar ones yourself, and if there's a technique out there you'd like me to check out and demonstrate next, as I'm just learning by doing here and hope we can practice together. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next sketchbook video.